Picture this. You are a cowboy in 1885, miles from civilization, when suddenly the sky turns green. The wind stops completely. Your horse starts acting crazy. Then you hear it? That terrifying freight train sound getting closer and closer. A tornado is coming straight for you, and there is nowhere to run. What do? Today I am going to tell you the incredible, true stories of how cowboys survived some of the deadliest tornadoes in American history. And trust me, some of these survival tactics will blow your mind. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what to do if you ever find yourself face to face with nature's most violent storm. But first, let me tell you about the cowboy who rode through a tornado and lived to tell about it. This story is so unbelievable that when it was first reported in the Kansas City Star newspaper in 1896, people thought it was complete fiction, but 3 witnesses confirmed every detail, and the aftermath was documented by local authorities. May 15, 1896, Kansas Territory. A cowboy named Samuel Morrison was driving a herd of 200 cattle across the endless prairie when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The western horizon had turned an unnatural shade of green, and the air felt electric. The hair on his arms was standing up, and his horse kept pawing the ground nervously. Morrison had been born and raised on these plains. His father had taught him to read the sky like other men read books. He could predict weather changes days in advance just by watching cloud formations and feeling atmospheric pressure. But what he saw that afternoon was unlike anything he had experienced in his 32 years of life. The green was not just any green. It was the color of deep ocean water, swirling and churning above his head. Lightning flickered constantly inside the clouds, but there was no thunder. The silence was absolutely terrifying. Even the cattle had stopped lowing and were standing perfectly still, all facing the same direction away from the approaching storm. Now Morrison had lived on the plains his entire life. He knew what that green sky meant. But what happened next defied everything we think we know about tornado survival. As the twister bore down on him, Morrison made a decision that sounds absolutely insane. Instead of running away from the tornado, he rode straight toward it. I know what you are thinking. That is suicide, right? Well, here is where it gets interesting. Morrison had noticed something that saved his life, something that most people, even today, do not know about tornadoes. He realized that this particular tornado was moving in a specific pattern, and there was a dead zone, a small area, where the winds actually created a pocket of relative calm. Morrison had seen this phenomenon once before as a child, when his father had pointed out how debris would sometimes hover motionless near the edge of a twister. Morrison guided his horse into this pocket and rode alongside the tornado for over 2 miles before it finally dissipated. The experience was like riding through hell itself. The noise was so loud, he could not hear his own thoughts. Debris flew past him at incredible speeds, fence posts, tree branches, even a full-grown cow at one point. But in his little pocket of calm, Morrison was protected. Morrison not only survived, he saved his entire herd. The cattle had instinctively followed his horse into the safe zone. When the tornado finally died out, Morrison found himself and his herd completely unharmed, surrounded by a landscape that looked like a battlefield. But how did he know about this dead zone? That is where cowboy wisdom gets really fascinating, because Morrison's knowledge did not come from books or formal education. It came from something much more powerful, generations of accumulated survival knowledge passed down through cowboy culture. You see, cowboys did not have Doppler radar or weather apps. They had something else. They had nature. And after decades of living under the biggest sky in America, they learned to read signs that most people completely miss. Cowboys were the ultimate weather watchers. They had to be. Their lives, their livelihoods, and the lives of their cattle depended on their ability to predict and survive extreme weather. They developed an almost supernatural ability to read atmospheric conditions, and they passed this knowledge down from old-timer to greenhorn through stories, songs, and hard-won experience. Let me show you the 5 tornado signs that cowboys used that could save your life today. These signs were so reliable that experienced cowboys could predict a tornado's arrival up to an hour before it formed, giving them precious time to find shelter or get out of the way. Sign number 1, the green sky. When the sky turns green, it is because the storm is so powerful, it is actually filtering sunlight through massive amounts of water and ice. Cowboys called this the devil's light, and they were right to fear it. Modern meteorology has confirmed that green skies are one of the most reliable indicators of severe weather. The green color occurs when red light from the setting sun is filtered through the blue ice particles in severe thunderstorms. If you see a green sky, you have maybe 30 to 45 minutes before things get really bad. Sign number 2, the dead calm. Before a tornado hits, the wind completely stops. This is not just a light breeze dying down. This is complete, absolute stillness. Cowboys knew that when their hats stopped blowing in the wind, when dust stopped swirling, when even the smallest grass blade stopped moving, they had maybe 10 to 15 minutes to find shelter. This dead calm is caused by the tornado's circulation pattern, literally sucking all the surrounding air into its vortex. Sign number 3, animal behavior. This is where cowboy knowledge really shines. Horses would refuse to move in certain directions, sometimes becoming so agitated that experienced cowboys could not control them. Cattle would huddle together facing away from the approaching storm, forming tight defensive circles. Dogs would whine and pace constantly. Even wild animals behaved strangely. Birds would fly in erratic patterns or disappear entirely, and insects would swarm in unusual ways. Cowboys learned to trust their animals' instincts more than their own eyes, and modern science has proven them right. Animals can sense changes in barometric pressure, electromagnetic fields, and infrasound vibrations that occur before tornadoes form. Sign number 4, the sound. They called it the devil's train, and once you have heard it, you will never forget it. That freight train sound you hear, it is not just wind, it is debris being torn apart at 200+ miles per hour. But experienced cowboys knew there were actually several different sounds to listen for. First came a low, almost subsonic rumble that you felt more than heard. Then came the freight train roar. But the most terrifying sound was what they called the devil's whistle, a high-pitched shrieking caused by wind moving through debris at supersonic speeds. If you heard the whistle, the tornado was close enough to kill you. Sign number 5, the wall cloud. Cowboys could spot the rotating wall cloud that drops tornadoes from miles away. They called it the devil's fist reaching down from heaven. A wall cloud is a localized lowering of the storm cloud, usually occurring in the most dangerous part of the storm. Cowboys learned to identify the subtle rotation in these clouds, the way they would slowly spin and gradually lower toward the ground. Modern storm chasers use this same technique today, but cowboys were doing it 150 years ago with nothing but their eyes and experience. But knowing the signs is only half the battle. What did cowboys actually do when a tornado was coming? That is where things get really wild, because cowboy survival tactics were a combination of brilliant innovation and terrifying desperation. Cowboys developed survival tactics that were so effective, some of them are still used by storm chasers today, but some of their methods were so dangerous, they would make modern meteorologists have nightmares. These techniques were born from necessity and refined through tragedy, as each generation of cowboys learned from the mistakes of those who came before. Tactic number 1, the ditch method. When caught in open prairie with no natural shelter, cowboys would find the lowest ground possible, usually a dry creek bed, a buffalo wallow, or a natural depression, and lie flat with their face down, covering their head with their arms. This protected them from flying debris, which kills more people than the wind itself. But cowboys added their own modifications to this technique. They would remove their heavy leather chaps and use them as shields, covering their backs and heads. They would also anchor themselves by grabbing onto roots or rocks, because even lying flat, the wind could still pick up and throw a grown man. Tactic number 2, the horse sacrifice. This sounds brutal, but it saved lives. If a cowboy could not find natural shelter, he would actually use his horse as a windbreak, positioning the horse between himself and the tornado. The horse's body mass could deflect smaller debris that would otherwise be fatal. This was not done lightly. Cowboys loved their horses and depended on them for survival, but they knew that losing a horse was better than losing a life. Some cowboys would actually tie themselves to their horse's belly, using the animal's weight to keep from being blown away. Tactic number 3, the triangle formation. When cowboys were traveling in groups, they developed something called the triangle formation. They would spread out in a triangle pattern covering about a square mile, with each cowboy watching a different section of sky. When one spotted danger, they had a whistle system to alert the others. The whistles were not just random signals. Cowboys developed a complex code that could communicate the tornado's size, direction, and speed. A long blast meant tornado sighted. 2 short blasts meant take cover immediately. 3 blasts meant all clear. Tactic number 4, the underground cache. Experienced cowboys would pre-dig small storm shelters along common cattle routes. These were just big enough for 1 or 2 men and were marked with subtle signs that only other cowboys would recognize. The shelters were engineering marvels for their time, reinforced with wooden beams, stocked with water and hardtack biscuits, and positioned to drain water efficiently. Cowboys would maintain these caches like a secret network, ensuring that anyone who knew the signs could find safety. But here is the craziest part. Some cowboys developed a technique that sounds like something out of a movie. They learned to read the ground itself, looking for signs of previous tornado damage that would indicate the most likely paths for future twisters. There was a group of cowboys in the 1880s who actually became known as tornado riders. These were men who deliberately sought out tornadoes, not because they had a death wish, but because they had discovered something that modern science did not understand until the 1970s. Now, before you think they were just crazy, hear me out. These men had discovered something remarkable about tornado behavior. They realized that tornadoes follow predictable patterns based on the terrain. A tornado moving across flat prairie behaves differently than one moving through hills or river valleys. The tornado riders mapped these patterns and used them to actually predict where tornadoes would go. They noticed that certain geographic features seemed to attract tornadoes: river valleys, ridgelines, and areas where different types of terrain met. They also observed that tornadoes had a tendency to follow the same paths repeatedly, like invisible highways in the sky. The most famous of these was a cowboy named Jake Sullivan, nicknamed Twister. Between 1883 and 1889, Sullivan encountered 17 different tornadoes and survived every single one. But Sullivan was not just lucky, he was a student of tornado behavior in a way that would not be seen again until the advent of modern meteorology. Sullivan's secret? He had mapped what he called tornado roads, the natural paths that twisters followed across the landscape. He could look at the terrain and predict exactly where a tornado would travel. He studied the way wind moved across different landscapes, how it was channeled by hills and valleys, and how it responded to changes in temperature and pressure. Sullivan kept detailed journals of every tornado encounter, recording wind directions, cloud formations, terrain features, and the behavior of animals and plants. He was basically conducting scientific research without even knowing it. His journals, which still exist today, contain observations that were not confirmed by official meteorology until decades later. But Sullivan's most famous encounter happened in 1887, and when you hear this story, you will understand why people thought he had made a deal with the devil. This story was reported in newspapers across the country and made Sullivan a legend throughout the West. Sullivan was tracking a herd of wild Mustangs in the Texas Panhandle when he spotted a massive F4 tornado heading straight for a settlement called Prosperity Creek. Population 47 people, including women and children. The town consisted of just a general store, a church, a schoolhouse, and about a dozen houses scattered along a creek bed. The tornado was moving faster than a horse could run, and there was no way to warn the town in time. Sullivan was 5 miles from the settlement, and the tornado was only 2 miles away. By the time he could ride to town, the tornado would have already hit. So Sullivan did something that defies belief. He rode directly into the tornado's path and fired his pistol into the air repeatedly. But this was not random shooting. Sullivan had observed that certain sounds could affect tornado behavior, particularly in the less stable outer edges of the vortex. The sound of the gunshots in the tornado created a specific acoustic effect that actually changed the tornado's rotation slightly, just enough to make it veer away from the town and into an empty valley. The science behind this is complex, but essentially, Sullivan had created acoustic disruptions that affected the tornado's vortex dynamics. 47 people lived because of Sullivan's insane courage and deep understanding of tornado behavior. The town of Prosperity Creek erected a monument to Sullivan that still stands today, though the town itself was eventually abandoned during the Dust Bowl. But not every cowboy was as lucky as Sullivan. On April 14, 1893, the most devastating tornado in Wild West history struck a cattle drive in what is now Oklahoma. This tornado was so powerful that it created its own weather system, spawning additional tornadoes as it moved across the landscape. This is the story of the Lost Trail Drive, and it is both heartbreaking and inspiring. It shows both the limitations of cowboy tornado survival techniques and the incredible courage of the men who faced nature's fury with nothing but their wits and their loyalty to each other. A cattle drive of 47 cowboys was moving 3,000 head of cattle north to Kansas when they encountered what meteorologists today estimate was an F5 tornado, the strongest category possible. The tornado was over a mile wide at its base and packed winds exceeding 300 miles per hour. It was the kind of storm that could level entire towns. The trail boss, a veteran cowboy named William Big Bill Carson, saw the tornado coming from 15 miles away. Carson had been running cattle drives for over 20 years and had survived 3 previous tornado encounters. He knew exactly what they were facing, and he knew that conventional survival tactics would not be enough. He had maybe 20 minutes to save his men and as many cattle as possible. In those 20 minutes, Carson had to make decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Carson made a decision that saved lives but cost him everything he owned. He ordered his men to cut the herd loose and scatter in all directions. "Every man for himself," he shouted. But remember the buddy system? It was the hardest order he had ever given, watching thousands of dollars worth of cattle disappear into the chaos. The buddy system was a cowboy survival technique where each man was responsible for one other specific cowboy. No matter what happened, you stuck with your buddy. This system had evolved from years of dangerous work in hostile territory, where looking out for your partner often meant the difference between life and death. As the tornado hit, cowboys scattered across miles of prairie, but each man made sure his buddy was safe. They used every survival technique they knew, diving into creek beds, taking shelter behind horses, even trying to outrun the storm on horseback. The tornado was so wide that some cowboys found themselves inside it for several minutes, fighting for their lives in a world gone mad. When the dust settled, they had lost 2,800 cattle and their entire chuck wagon, which contained all their food, medical supplies, and cooking equipment. But incredibly, only 3 cowboys died, and those 3 had ignored Carson's orders and tried to save the cattle instead of themselves. The surviving cowboys walked 150 miles to the nearest town with nothing but the clothes on their backs, but they walked together and they all made it. Carson used his own savings to ensure that every surviving cowboy received full pay for the drive, even though there were no cattle left to sell. This disaster led to the development of what became known as the Carson Protocol, a systematic approach to tornado survival that was passed down through cowboy culture for generations. The protocol included specific procedures for different sized groups, designated rally points, and a communication system that could work even in the chaos of a major storm. The Carson Protocol became so effective that it was eventually adopted by the U.S. Army for use in severe weather situations, and elements of it are still used by emergency responders today. So what can we learn from these cowboys today? It turns out quite a lot. Modern meteorologists have studied cowboy tornado survival techniques, and some of their methods are now taught in storm safety courses across the Midwest. But the lessons go beyond just survival techniques. Cowboys understood something about facing extreme danger that we often forget in our modern climate-controlled world. They knew that panic kills more people than tornadoes do, and they developed mental techniques for staying calm in the face of overwhelming terror. Lesson number 1. Trust natural warning signs. Cowboys were right about animal behavior. Modern research shows that animals can detect changes in barometric pressure and electromagnetic fields that occur before tornadoes form. Studies have found that animals can sense these changes up to several hours before tornado formation, giving much earlier warning than even modern weather radar. Lesson number 2. The ditch method still works. The cowboy technique of lying flat in the lowest ground available is still the recommended survival method if you are caught in the open during a tornado. The National Weather Service officially recommends this technique, and it has saved thousands of lives over the past century. Lesson number 3. Debris is the real killer. Cowboys understood that flying objects were more dangerous than wind. Modern tornado fatality studies prove they were absolutely right. Over 80% of tornado deaths are caused by flying debris, not by the wind itself. Cowboys' focus on finding cover from debris rather than just wind was scientifically sound. Lesson number 4. Community survival. The buddy system and whistle communication that cowboys developed are now used by emergency response teams around the world. The idea that individual survival is enhanced by group cooperation has become a fundamental principle of disaster response. Lesson number 5. Preparation saves lives. Cowboys' practice of pre-positioning emergency supplies and shelters along travel routes is now standard practice for emergency management agencies. The underground cache system has evolved into modern storm shelter networks and emergency supply depots. But here is the most important thing cowboys understood about tornado survival. You cannot fight nature, but you can outsmart it. Cowboys survived because they respected the power of tornadoes while refusing to be paralyzed by fear. They studied, they planned, and when disaster struck, they acted decisively. They understood that survival was not about being the toughest or the strongest, it was about being the most prepared and the most aware. They also understood that survival was a community effort. The cowboy who tried to go it alone usually did not make it. The ones who survived were the ones who looked out for each other, who shared knowledge and resources, and who understood that everyone's survival depended on everyone else's actions. Today, storm chasers use technology that cowboys could never have imagined, but they still use some of the same basic principles. Reed Timmer, one of the most famous storm chasers alive, has said that studying cowboy tornado survival techniques made him a better storm chaser. He learned to read natural signs that his instruments could not detect, and to trust his instincts when technology failed. And in rural areas of Tornado Alley, you can still find ranchers who use modified versions of cowboy tornado survival methods passed down through their families. These modern cowboys combine traditional knowledge with contemporary technology, creating survival systems that are more effective than either approach alone. Every year, the United States experiences about 1,000 tornadoes. They kill an average of 70 people annually and cause billions in damage. But the fatality rate has actually decreased over the past century, partly because we have learned to apply lessons that cowboys figured out 150 years ago. The most deadly tornado in U.S. history was the Tri-State Tornado of 1925, which killed 695 people across Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. But even in that catastrophe, the people who survived were often those who applied cowboy-style survival techniques, seeking low ground, protecting themselves from debris, and helping their neighbors. So the next time you see those dark clouds building on the horizon, remember the cowboys who faced nature's fury with nothing but their wits, their courage, and their deep respect for the power of the natural world. These men did not have weather apps or storm warnings, but they had something we often lack today: the the knowledge that comes from truly paying attention to the world around us. They lived their lives connected to natural rhythms and patterns that most of us have forgotten. They understood that survival is not just about having the right equipment or the latest technology. It is about developing the skills to read your environment, the wisdom to prepare for disaster before it strikes, and the courage to act decisively when your life depends on it. And who knows, if you ever find yourself in the path of a tornado, the survival wisdom of a cowboy from 1885 might just save your life. These techniques are not just historical curiosities. They are practical knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. In our age of smartphones and satellite weather tracking, we sometimes forget that the most reliable weather predictor is often right in front of us if we know how to read the signs. If you enjoyed this deep dive into cowboy tornado survival, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, I am covering the most dangerous animals cowboys faced on the frontier, and trust me, some of these creatures will give you nightmares. We are talking about grizzly bears that stood 12 feet tall, wolf packs that hunted in groups of 50, and rattlesnakes so venomous that one bite could kill a horse. And if you want to see more incredible survival stories from American history, check out this video about how pioneers survived blizzards that were so bad they froze entire towns solid. You will learn about the Donner Party, the children's blizzard of 1888, and survival techniques that kept people alive in temperatures that would kill most of us in minutes.